Okay, so today's topic is something near and dear to my heart. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you're probably like, what has gotten into that man? It's a system that comes to us from a Canadian school called the Royal Conservatory of Music, which is a proper school in Toronto. Been around for a long, long time. Very, very excellent reputation. We don't know about it so much in the States, but it's got a huge reputation in Canada. In addition to the things they do as a school, they also curate, for lack of a better term, a training program. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today as you guys start to think about either your very first teaching that you do as a private teacher or some of your early days of teaching. So, let's set the table. Some challenges for voice teachers. This slide used to have for young voice teachers, but I took it out because I thought, you know, these challenges don't go away. So a couple of things that are challenging as a voice teacher. What exercises do I teach? Many of us teach simply what our teachers taught us, especially in the early days of our teaching, or what sort of comes to mind right off the top of your head. Very few of us really are thoughtful and mindful and deliberate about, okay, Emma needs X, Y, and Z for her development. The appropriate exercises for that development would be A, B, and C. Right? That takes time. A lot of the things we're going to talk about take time. And time is something that's in short supply for teachers. Right? Especially private teachers who really have 30-minute lessons. I have a student coming later today, 30-minute lesson. That is like, I look down at my watch and 27 minutes are gone and we've done a third of the things I had hoped to do. This really, really goes by in a hurry. When I first started teaching, that seemed like an eternity. Now it seems like the blink of an eye when 30 minutes are up. So, theoretically, we should be gradually increasing the scope and difficulty and sophistication of our students' exercises. But I think a lot of teachers wind up doing the same scales and arpeggios for months and years on end, just because it's not something that comes up in their mind to, oh yeah, how do I do that? What songs do I teach? That's a big one for young students. Songs for people of your voice type, not such a big deal, not such a hard thing to figure out. But if you're a young baritone and you've got a student who's a soprano, I don't know, right? And most of us fall into this trap. Let's see, her voice sort of sounds like Susie, who I went to school with. What does she sing? Right? Which is a way to choose repertoire. It's not a very good way to choose repertoire, unless your student is the carbon copy of old Susie, right? We'll talk a lot this semester about Susie Soprano, which is one of my faves. As a result of repertoire assignment being tricky, I see a rampant, just a deluge of over-assignment. And a lot of the things I'm going to say, this included, I have to look in the mirror, and I see it in myself too. I sometimes think back on songs that my students sang and think, what was I thinking giving that to her when she was only a freshman? You know? It's easy to do. The student standing in front of you is passionate and excited and engaged, and you know a fabulous song that you don't necessarily have filed specifically in your head as to how hard it is or when it should be sung, right? And so it's really, really an easy trap to fall into. All of these things, this very much included, none of these come from ill will. They come from the opposite. They come from excitement and passion and, oh, they'll just love this song, right? But they're a problem nonetheless. How do I help them improve musicianship? Ask 100 voice teachers, do you think that along with your students' technical and repertoire development, that it's important for them to continue to grow as a musician? Their ear training, their ability to hear intervals, all that stuff. 100 of them will say, oh yeah. Then ask them, what do you do in every lesson to help with that? And they go, right? Again, same, before I started using the RCM stuff, right? Because, from my perspective, as a teacher, without knowledge of a system to use, I then am saying, implicitly, I need to devise a system to cover all of this information. You know what I mean? That's a big task to do when you're just trying to get people memorized for their thing and get them off to their audition and all that sort of thing. Another thing for private teachers, you know, if you think about what you guys do, every semester you have a jury. Each of you are assigned to singing on a voice area recital. Your semester has rhythm. There are goals. There are guideposts along the way. Why am I learning this song? Because I have to sing on studio class next Friday, right? With private students, you don't necessarily have that, especially if they're not very active in terms of solo and ensemble or doing auditions or competitions or whatever, right? Some of them are very active in doing that. But some private students, we're having a seemingly endless series of lessons. I'm not 100% sure why. You know, they love to sing, obviously they're trying to develop skills, but it's not always abundantly clear what are we working towards. So these are all things that every private teacher faces. Most young voice students, and I'm talking pre-college voice students, they receive little or no theory or ear training in their voice lessons. Now some of them will also take piano lessons, which are generically, I can say, more systematized and are more likely to contain elements of theory and even sight reading at the piano and all that sort of thing. But their voice lessons, typically not so much, for the reasons I just talked about. They might get a little bit in choir. They might, if they're super duper lucky, go to a high school that has AP music theory, right? But the vast majority of your students will not have that background if they don't play another instrument or don't go to a high school with AP theory. Here's a big one. Most, perhaps almost all, pre-college students learn their music by rote. Yeah? Meaning that the teacher goes, you know, da 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 da, and the student goes, na 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 na, right? And just learns it by rote. Or, even more prevalent, they learn it by what I call a crutch. Lauren, here's a new song for you. Let me sit down and play the accompaniment and bang out your line above it. You take that home. And is she exercising her musicianship skills at all? No. But then the argument to that is like, well, she doesn't have any musicianship skills. She's got to learn this song, right? So this is the catch-22 that voice teachers find themselves in all the time. Again, it's by no malice or ill will. It's just the exigencies of, hey, we got to learn some music, overtake the skill development. Choral directors, get ready for the exact same thing. It's a lot easier to say to your principal, my choir got a 1 at contest. See? And the quickest way to get a 1 at contest is to teach your students their music by rote. Tenors, that's not how that goes. It goes like this, right? But that has no positive impact, or very little positive impact, on their skill assertion over time. It's much harder sell to go to your principal and say, well, we got a 3 at contest, but my students are gaining skill in terms of their rhythmic recognition and their interval identification. You'd be like, I don't know, what? Right? So I totally get how people fall into these traps, but they are traps nonetheless. Again, with the over-assignment. Many pre-college students sing collegiate level repertoire too early. Again, it's because their teachers, the majority of the repertoire that their teachers have in their heads are the stuff that they or their colleagues sang in college. Okay? So it's really, really easy. The other thing that has happened as a result of that is people who teach high school students primarily have gotten accustomed to hearing too hard rep sung not so great. And sort of substituted in their head that that's actually pretty good singing. Does that make sense? When I started using appropriate level repertoire through the RCM, I suddenly heard my students actually singing repertoire that was suited to their age level and their achievement level, and my mind was blown. Literally the first song I assigned with RCM in mind, that student blew me away in their first lesson with how well they sang, and then subsequently sang at a recital in front of a group of my peers, and they all were like, what happened to her? Right? So there exists a vast repertoire, high quality repertoire, written by people you've heard of, and some that you haven't. And I constantly am hearing things and I'm like, man, this is fabulous. Why haven't I ever heard this before, right? That is truly masterable by a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old, right? Then and only then would they ramp up to the stuff that is truly masterable by an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old. Okay? That is an improvement on what we typically do because all of these things are affected. Vocal development, often the music that the students are singing when it's over-assigned is too difficult for their current instrument. The big one is self-efficacy. Anybody know what self-efficacy even means? Daniel.
It's basically your assessment of how good or bad you are at something.
Exactly. Exactly. This is hugely important to me, right? Two concepts are very important to me. A student's self-efficacy and a student's self-mastery. We sometimes use the word self-discipline. I really don't like that term because discipline has, again, all kinds of connotations that are gross. Self-mastery, right? As my health has gotten better and my weight has gone lower, I have experienced a tremendous surge of pride from self-mastery. Because Kyle, for years and years and years and years, would have eaten that bag of chips. Kyle now has figured out how to eat a serving of chips. Which before I was like, serving? For whom? A bird? Right? And I'm like, that's a logical amount of chips. Cool. Right? That's self-mastery. Right? And as Daniel said, self-efficacy is, I can do this. So what better gift could you give to your student than the skill set to say, here's a piece of music, please learn it as well as you can by next week. And they mentally, even subconsciously say, I have all the tools I need to do exactly that. Rather than, God, I hope it's on YouTube. Right? This is another one. Young students, and I remember feeling this way, have little or no orientation as to where they lie in the pantheon of singing. Precisely how good or bad am I? Where am I on the sliding scale of no skill to fabulous, 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 right? And this can help with that a little bit. Has anybody ever studied karate? So karate is a tiered, I don't know much about it, I haven't studied it myself, but I do know that it's a tiered system where if you want to earn the first belt, you have to do X, Y, and Z. If you want to earn the next belt up from that, you have to do that plus some. If you want to earn the next, etc., all the way up. And the yellow belts know their yellow belts, and the brown belts know their brown belts, and the black belts know their black belts. Right? It doesn't make you super cool if you're a higher belt than someone else. It just means that you've been on the path a little bit longer. Okay? So this provides that same concept. Let's go to college. You guys are going to feel seen a little bit here, I bet. Many college students silo the information that they receive in theory and oral skills and piano class and say, that's for oral theory, and that's where that information stays. Part of the reason they do that, it's easy to do that because we rarely call upon those skills elsewhere. Right? Likewise, the sight singing that we do in choir is like when you go bowling with the things blown up in the lanes, right? It's not really bowling because you can't go into the gutters. There's bound to be somebody in your choir, either next to you or close to you, that's singing, you know, all of us together can sort of find our way, even though we all make mistakes along the way. So when you ask your student who's even good at that in choir to sight sing by themselves, get ready. It's kind of shocking because they've not had the true solo sight singing experience of having no, help. Yeah? And I don't know about how it's taught here, and I'm not here to throw, darts at how we do things, but I know in my oral theory, it was like, we will have a sight singing quiz on numbers 281, 284, and 287 on Thursday. It's like, that's not sight singing. I'm going to go practice like crazy. Are you kidding? That's not sight singing. The other thing about this, the study of that at most institutions, every institution I've taught at, ends in your sophomore year. Which gives the tacit understanding that, now you're good. From this point on, straight to sunset, right? It does not suggest that we need to continue transferring that information and synthesizing that information, you know, and bringing that information from your oral theory class into your practice time and your, you know, that sort of thing. Too often, college students continue to use the crutches that they used in high school. Why wouldn't you? Worked for you then, works for you now. Can I or can I not find a recording of Schubert's Seligkeit? Oh, there it is. Right? Ooh, it's black and white. Must be a good singer. Right? Right? So it's so easy to fall into that trap. They continue to either receive over-assigned music, or later in your life, later in your career, when you start to say, hey, can I sing this song? You're over-assigning it to yourself. Right? I totally did that. I must have driven my teacher nuts. Can I sing this Wagner aria? No, not now and not ever. Right? And instead he had to be like, well, let's find something else. You know, it's like, bless his heart. Still no orientation to skill level. All God's children know that all of our voice majors are not at the same level. Right? And that's not to cast aspersions at the people that are not at a high level, or to go, wow, the people at a high level, right? But wouldn't it be an interesting thing to know who's an 8 and who's a 6, right? And the 8s could help the 6s, and the 6s could go, wow, every time that 8 sings in studio class, I really love it. Well, why? Well, because she's got more skill than you do. Get it up. Here's what you need to do. Here's the skills she's got that you don't. Ready, set, go. Right? And I think the most disservice is to those people that are at a lower skill level, because they don't know what to do. They don't know what they're missing. They don't know how to get there. The other thing I mentioned earlier, it's very easy. It's much easier for the teacher and the student to stick with the same technical exercises with no trajectory, no growth, or limited trajectory and growth. Of course, I sang an octave arpeggio better as a senior than I did as a freshman. But was I mindfully adding elements to it and cranking up the difficulty to support the repertoire that I was singing? No. Certainly not mindfully, maybe subconsciously. Okay? So, there's a solution to all this. Every single problem I just addressed is mitigated for by this system. This is not the only system, by the way. There's a British system called RCM. There's another Canadian, well, is it from Canada? I can't remember. Trinity College has another one. That, speaking, Mariah, of, speaking of non-classical genres, that's one that I'm told has more repertoire from the non-classical genres.
The other Canadian?
The Trinity College. I can't remember if it's a Canadian outfit or a British outfit. What is RCM? And now I'm talking about not the school, but the system. The certificate program is what they officially call it. You'll see it referenced in this packet. I gave you an article from the Nats Journal. Several years ago, there was a merger, a sort of co-production with Carnegie Hall, and at that time they called it the Achievement Program. That, I don't know why, but that has ceased to be. So wherever you see Carnegie Hall Achievement Program, that's what is now simply known as the Royal Conservatory of Music Certificate Program. Okay? Same stuff, different name. RCM provides a system of music study and assessment for 20 plus instruments. If you look at the list of things they have, it's every standard band instrument, you know, orchestra instrument that you could possibly think of, and even some like ukulele, right? Harp. There are a couple of other ones, and of course piano. There's an RCM system for piano. It's all sequenced from elementary to advanced. Yeah? And I'm talking advanced. The top level is roughly the equivalent of what most master's students would sing on their recitals. It's very significant repertoire. So this is not something that sort of, you age out of it by the time you're 15 or something like that. It's one of the strengths of it, I think, is that you can get about as difficult as you want to. Does anyone know what scaffolded instruction means, or scaffolding?
Compare with higher level students with the lower level students, help them support them.
That's one way of scaffolding. The instruction being scaffolded in itself means what? Yeah,
Just gets, that it builds on previously learned skills.
precisely.
Okay.
Precisely. It just grows and grows and grows. Kind of like the karate thing I said. When you go to the second level of karate, you still need to be able to do the things you did at the first level, and then you add a few things. The point of scaffolded instruction and why it's such a brilliant system is that it gradually cranks up the level. Make sense? Assessments are available. So if you have a student who wants to take the test and get the certificate, they can do that. They go sing for a judge who's approved by the RCM. If they pass, if they get a 70 or above out of 100, they get their certificate. They have officially passed level whatever. Okay? But the syllabus is available online as a PDF for free. So any teacher can and should use it as a free resource and can take it sort of a la carte, can take as many of the elements of it, which we'll discuss in a minute, as they want to and fold them into their teaching. I'm using this now. I've started using it with my, especially my undergrads, but I've started using a lot of it with my grad students too. And I'm finding already, it's week 3, right? But I'm finding already they're getting better, and I'm starting to see little glimpses of that self-efficacy concept. I really got red hot about this with the release of the updated voice syllabus, which happened this June, okay? And I started using it during my teaching at Interlochen. And that story I told earlier about the student who I gave an appropriately assigned, that happened at Interlochen, and it was like a revelation for me. Just, I was immediately super kind of indicted by, oh my gosh. I went through my students, here's the full thing. Most pieces that you would consider standard repertoire are graded, right? And you can say this is a level 9, this is a level whatever, yeah? And I went through and thought, okay, student X is probably a level 5, maybe 6. I gave them such and such piece. I wonder what that level is. Level 10. You're like, right? You do it again and again and again. And over, I was overshooting. The repertoire was overshot by 2, 3, 4 grades. And I am not alone, folks. This is not a Kyle problem. This is a sort of systematic problem with how voice is taught. Also, I looked at some of the repertoire at the lower grades, and even things by composers I was familiar with. I was like, I don't know that song. Let me check it out. The second I listened to it, I'm like, oh, this is fabulous. And I started to see like, oh, you sing this now, and that sets Sally Soprano up to sing Purcell in a couple years, and that sets her up to sing Donizetti later. You know what I mean? So you really saw, it's as if I was just skipping the first step on a ladder and having to go like this, right? That's how I feel like our students, everyone in this room had to do that. So they're like, okay, here you go. You know, hoist yourself up onto the 3rd rung, having missed the 1st and 2nd. Okay? I would recommend the assessments because I think they're another goalpost. It's a nice thing to say that you've done. It's another feather in your cap. But I, for one, am not going to require it because they do cost. They're a couple $100 to take the assessment. And, you know, I'm not going to force anyone to do it. But I have a feeling that some of my students, when they really get up to speed with it, will go like, yeah, let's do it. You know, the same people that say, oh, there's a marathon. I'm going to run it. Why? Because it's there. Like, why not? It's a cool challenge. Okay, the elements of the RCM include the following. All at graded, scaffolded levels. Technical exercises, aka voice exercises, which is what you have in front of you. If you look right here, that's the technical exercises by grade level. Ear tests, including all of the following. Intervals, chords, chord progressions, and what's called rhythmic clapback. So I would play, for instance, for rhythmic clapback, I would play, and you would do, okay? Repertoire, vocalises, starting at level 5, okay? So separate from the technical exercises, vocalises. Sight singing, ding, 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 ding. And then on a separate track, theory and history. At first, in the lower levels, these are called corresponding courses, meaning it'd be nice if you also did this, right? But you don't have to do it in order to pass your level vocally. At the upper levels, they become co-requisites. If you want to pass out of level 8 vocally, you also have to pass, I think it's right along with it, level 8 theory. Make sense? There are 12 levels. In the case of voice, at least, I'm not sure about all of them, but in voice, there are 12 levels from lowest to highest skill. Not necessarily age. So if you had an adult beginner who is a true beginner, I would put them quite far down low, especially in the vocal exercises, because they simply won't have the skills. You're giving them that first rung of the ladder. So there are 12 total. By title, they are preparatory, and then 1 through 10. And then the top one is called ARCT, which means Associate of the Royal Conservatory of Toronto, which is the old-fashioned name for the Royal Conservatory of Music, right? And that's like a diploma. For most master's students, that I think of that as being either a bachelor's degree plus, like a little higher than the level of most senior recitals, at or slightly lower perhaps than the level of most master's recitals. So, in applying this to my students, I'm telling all of my graduate students, why not get your master's and your ARCT? You can use a lot of the same repertoire, right? Same with doctoral students. Sarah Harper, who just graduated, I've suggested to her, you should do the ARCT. You've got all the repertoire. Look at this, you've got, right? And to my way of thinking, you've already got the skills and the repertoire to earn it. Why not earn it and have another feather in your cap for a couple $100? You know, if I told you to take one more class that would cost you $200 and look good on your resume, you'd do it in a heartbeat, right? This is similar to that sort of concept. Again, the levels are not graded. So if you look at level 8, that's not an 8th grader, right? And in fact, those higher levels in the 1 through 10 zone start to get to the point where the music is sophisticated enough, the technical ability is sophisticated enough, and the subject matter of the repertoire is sophisticated enough that you kind of have to tap the brakes sometimes if somebody's been really avid with this since they began. Here's the write-up from the syllabus itself. Technical requirements are designed to support the demands of the repertoire for each level. Why do we do technical exercises in the first place? To build the voice so that it's ready for the repertoire. Technical tests include patterns based on scales, chords, and arpeggios. Vocalises develop technical skills within a musical context while providing the opportunity to refine formation of vowels. Yeah? Vocalises, if you don't know that term, sometimes the term vocal exercises and vocalises get used interchangeably. A vocalise truly is a song without words. Yeah? So those are differentiated from vocal exercises, which are just little snippets, right? Vocalises can be whole, even song length, but they're, a minute long, 2 minutes long. If you've ever sung Bacchae or Marchesi or Panofka or whatever, those are vocalises. Okay? Technical exercises, again, are scaffolded. As an example, take chromatic scales. At level 3, the singer has to sing a chromatic scale up to the 3rd, right? From the root of the chord to the 3rd. At level 4, they go up to the 5th. At level 6, they go up to the 6th. At level 7, they go up to the octave, and then beyond. I can't remember what it is, level 9 or 10 is like all the way up to the 10th and back down. So they get progressively more and more athletic while building on the same core concept. Imagine being the student who did level 3 up to the 3rd. Your teacher says, let's go on to level 4, or you pass the test. You go on and you go, oh, it's the same thing, just up to the 5th. Self-efficacy. Right? There's a little sample. I'm using for our discussion today level 5 since it's in the middle. Okay? Level 5 is where I would assume most skilled juniors/seniors in high school would be. Right? These are all a little fluid. Some people will be much further ahead of that. Some people will not be that far ahead. So it's hard to really pinpoint that exact concept. But of the students that I've experienced, that's where most of them are. Theory and oral skills reinforcement. Take a look at what's on there. You can look at it in your packet too. You got your minor scales, minor arpeggios, chromatic scales. In my experience, those 3 items very rarely make an appearance in a voice lesson. And it's pretty, humorous isn't the right word. It's pretty interesting to watch people who are advanced singers in other ways, and you say, okay, let's sing a natural minor scale. They go, right? Again, it's not funny, I'm not making fun of them, but it's really arresting to sort of find how dormant that information has gone in our minds. You still know what it is, but like, when's the last time you sang one? Probably all of you sing "ah" every day. Try doing a minor today. Which sounds easy, but the second you try, you're like, whoa, right? Just because it's, wait a minute, right? Vocal skills reinforcement are also very nicely scaffolded and folded in. A couple of things that we'll talk in, especially when we start talking about phonation, that are really, really useful are staccato. Staccato is one of the greatest exercises for clean onset that you'll ever find. When we talk about coordination, something that's a big deal for coordination is messa di voce, right? That coordinates tone production with breath management, breath budgeting, yeah? So all of these things are laced in. Also intervals, the interval exercises start relatively early with thirds and then approach fifths, and you start leaping all over the place before too long, right? And then the vocalises. Starting at level 5, there are vocalises. And there are books that are available that have simply the vocalises for each level. I think I left the other one on my scanner upstairs when I scanned this. But there's a 5 through 8, and then 9 and 10 for low voice and high voice. So these would include the vocalises that you would be required to sing, and the recitatives are also introduced at the later levels. So you study a recitative alone. Yeah? Again, a vocalise is a song without words. Traditionally, each vocalise has a technical focus. So for instance, if you look at the one I've shown here, it has a repeated rhythm of half, quarter, right? And that builds on its own sort of technical concepts. Look at the leaping it does as well. So there's some pretty decent leaps of fourths and fifths. It's going to build legato. Here in the later areas, it's going to build the ability to crescendo, the ability to use momentum, vocal momentum to get to the higher pitch, etc., etc. Right? Also, it's not all that long. It's relatively tonal. You could probably learn it pretty quickly, so it also, again, builds self-efficacy. Learn this by next week. By next week? Yeah. And then they do it, and they go, oh. Right? Musicianship skills. This is again from their own syllabus. A thoughtful and consistent approach to the development of ear training and sight reading provides students with a solid foundation for independent, creative musical explorations. The important thing to keep in mind always, the stuff you're doing with your students, the building of skills, is not for the skill building in and of itself. It's also not abuse for your students, right? It's to help them have the requisite tools to do really awesome things. To sing music that is truly challenging, truly rewarding, and to have the craft to go along with the art. Stereotypically, singers have a lot of art. They have big personalities, they have a story to tell, they have a lot of love and passion. Historically, traditionally, stereotypically, they have not so much craft. And I would reverse it. Every time I judge a concerto competition, all of the instrumentalists can play the snot out of their instruments. And there is no expression. Right? They are like music playing robots. And the virtuosity they display on their instrument is stunning. But does it move me? Does it have any heart? Does it have any red blood in its veins? You know? Flip the script. Singers are entertaining and tons of personality and very interesting, but are they virtuosic on their instrument? Rarely to the level that their instrumental peers are. So, my whole drive since the beginning of my career has been, how do we marry those two sides of the coin? right? And since I'm a voice teacher, I'm concerned with bringing more musical skill and musicianship into singers, right? While hoping that my instrumental colleagues will do the opposite work. Make sense? Musicianship skills are developed to support the goals and requirements of both performance of repertoire and theoretical concepts. So, at present, I'm not yet incorporating the clapback thing, or they also have chord progression recognition. Each level has, like, you have to be able to hear 1-5-1 apart from 1-4-1, for instance, right? And then later it gets a little more intense. They add things later as they scaffold in more things. At present, I am only involving the intervals and the chords and the sight singing, right? And I find that that takes enough time that I don't really have time to go further into depth. Again, this whole system is a la carte. If you have a student actually wanting to do the assessment, I would then need to help them prepare for the chord progressions and whatnot. So I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, perhaps by doing chord progressions one week and sight singing the next week, or on some sort of rotation. I don't know. We're not there yet. At present, I'm able to do all of this stuff every time, which I think is really useful for me at present, for my students at present. They're scaffolded again, gradual addition of intervals and chords. This appendix you have in front of you, I'm the one who went in at each level and added along in the margin what are the intervals and chords for each of those levels. Greedily, because I wanted that information. So what I've done is I've copied this for each of my students. And there's one sitting on my piano that says echo on it, right? And when Mariah comes to her lesson, I get that out and I say, okay, we're on level whatever, we haven't done this interval. By the way, what I do is when we do one of the intervals, I put a little check mark. If we've done it ascending, I put the check mark to the right of it. If we've done it descending, I put the check mark to the left of it. So I don't have to remember week to week, okay, we did ascending major thirds last time, let's do descending major thirds this time. So, how that works is from a given pitch, any given pitch, the student at each level is required to be able to produce from scratch the interval named. So let's say we're working on major thirds, and I go, okay, if this is do, find me mi, or if 1, find me 3, or whatever, right? Find me a major third ascending. One thing I do during that time is ask them how you would do that. How would you go about finding a major third, right? Because guessing is not acceptable. And I tell them over and over, at first, accuracy is the most important thing. Speed is a secondary consideration. Because a lot of people are like, oh, it's got to be fast, right? No, it needs to be right. And then once you get really good at your system, you'll figure out how to get fast. The reason this is really important to me is that I sing a lot of new music. And I sing a lot of old enough music that it existed before the rules existed, right? So there are parallel fifths all over the place. And there are other things that are sort of wrong to do in music writing that your theory professor would mark you down for, right? I find that pretty quickly in post-tonal, not even only atonal, but post-tonal music, sounds perfectly lovely, but if you look at it, it's not really in a key, right? Samuel Barber, Claude Debussy, like this is not new music, right? If you're looking at a Barber song, most of them, and thinking solfege, you're going to be out of your depth real quick, right? So at that point, what recourse do we have other than intervals? So I think this practice is super important. While students are singing music that's still tonal enough, they can start to go, oh, if I had to, I could find a perfect fourth from this given pitch, right? Another thing that I give a huge +1 to is an app called Earpeggio. Download it and play with it. I promise you'll be addicted by noon, okay? It again scaffolds. It has its own sort of logic, but it's also customizable. If you tell it under the practice tab, if you tell it, and this is where RCM can come in, if you say, I want to practice intervals, it says, which intervals would you like to practice? And you can say, well, I'm at level 4, so I'm going to practice the level 4 intervals, right? And then go for it. It can specify ascending or descending. It can specify from a fixed starting pitch or not from a fixed starting pitch, right? And it might seem real easy for the first 5 minutes. It gets pretty tricky pretty quick, right? So you can use that, or you can recommend it to your students. It's also free. Why it's free, I have no idea. That should be a paid app. It's so good. But it's free, and I would recommend it to every single person in this room, every single person in the building. Okay? There are other retraining apps, but I have latched onto this one. Chords, similarly, scaffolded. For the first several things, it's major versus minor. You play the chord as the teacher and say, is that chord a major or a minor chord? Right? What I've found is when people get a little sideways with them, if they have a puzzled look on their face, I'll say, okay, compared to, and they go, oh yeah, the first one was minor, right? So if you're teaching people, especially people with limited skills, that's how I would do that. If you have somebody that simply cannot hear major from minor right now, play them both of them and say, which order did I play them in? Minor, major, or major, minor? Okay? Self-efficacy. They add relatively quickly dominant seventh. Not too long after that, they add augmented and diminished, etc., etc. Major seven, major seven, all that sort of stuff. Sight singing. There are some external resources for sight singing that I am a big believer in. Chief among them, what I'm using is Sight Singing for Success by a Canadian voice teacher and author named Joan Heels. She has written it specifically with RCM in mind. So there are sight singing resources at each level. This is available by an ebook, quite cheaply by ebook, by the way. Or you can pay for the bound version with all 10, or I guess it's 12 levels in the bound version. But I simply downloaded the ebook and then printed it and made a little binder of my own, right? Each level, again, scaffolds. At first we're only in C major, then we're in C and F major, we work our way around the circle of fifths to increasingly complex keys. Start to add minors, crank up the level of rhythmic complexity, etc., etc. You get the gist by now, right? They also, if the student is going to take the assessment, they also are open to solfege or numbers or la la la, you know, singing on an individual vowel. They accept whatever system you want to use. And of course, I would do the same thing. It's been very interesting for me. I've been asking my students to make this as hyper-practical as I can. What works for you, right? Solfege, numbers, especially the grad students who did not go through a program that teaches numbers like our undergraduate program does, they get to choose whatever they want to. And a couple students count sing. They find the thing that orients them and grounds them and lets them do their best sight singing is to count sing rather than to do numbers or solfege. Okay? So it's very flexible. I would say generally about RCM, it's got structure with flexibility built into it. To me, it's the perfect mixture of structure and flexibility. As I mentioned, rhythmic clapback, chord progressions, and the music theory corresponding and eventually co-requisite and music history co-requisite are also available. I think if I had a private studio, I would offer music history and music theory classes for an extra charge. You know, some studios do this. Your lesson's on Tuesday, but on Saturday morning there's also a music theory class. Right? And some students elect to take it and some students don't because they play soccer. You know, whatever the case may be. Make sense? But if you wind up being somebody who has a private studio, there's a lot of that sort of thing that can happen. And I'm going to try to get later in the semester a guest, actually whom I've met through RCM, to come on and talk about the structure of private studios, because it's pretty exciting. I love my job. I'm not going to give it up anytime soon, but I think about that and I'm like, oh, that'd be really a cool challenge. Let's talk repertoire. Each level includes a broad selection of repertoire representing a variety of styles and periods. I'd also throw in there languages. They introduce language real early, which I love, but stuff that's really manageable. doesn't let people wait until they're 9,000 years old to sing in French for the first time, like we too often do. The people involved with RCM regularly review the repertoire to ensure a balance between familiar canon of teaching repertoire and new and innovative selections. There is a lot in the 2019 syllabus of stuff that was written really recently, and it's really exciting. I have gone through, not quite all of it yet, but I've listened to, I don't even know how many dozens and dozens of songs that are super brand new, and I like virtually all of them. And we're like, oh yeah, I could totally sign that. And I've done a lot of that. I think my colleagues and juries this semester are going to be like, what song is this? Where did you get that? You know? This is cool too. I mentioned flexibility. Teachers and or students can add favorite pieces through the teacher's choice selection, right? That could obviously work if you're just using the materials without doing the assessments. But even if you do the assessments, you can have a wild card. I'd like to sing song X. It's not on the list anywhere, but I'm going to substitute it for, you know, list A or list B or whatever. The way the repertoire lists work is they have, list A is, it changes a little bit depending on the grade, but list A is like folk song arrangements. List B will be Baroque to classical. List C will be romantic to early 20th century, that sort of thing. So it's a unique setup. I mentioned earlier, slightly easier repertoire, but repertoire that can be truly mastered. And there's that word again, self-efficacy. They publish books. So sticking with level 5, there's the level 5 book. Now, level 5 has 100 or so songs at it, and this has a subset of those. Okay? So the books include in them some standard repertoire, some repertoire that otherwise would be awfully hard to find, but by perhaps familiar composers, and some proprietary arrangements. So for instance, this one has Morning Has Broken, right? And it's by an arranger named Forrest Kinney, and if I'm not mistaken, the Royal Conservatory of Music, this was for 2012. So they hired him to write this arrangement for RCM. You see what I mean? It's not something that you can get in some other book. They commissioned it, essentially. Poor Wayfaring Stranger, same thing. You listen through these, and they're gorgeous arrangements of these standard melodies, right? Which legitimize the song in terms of a student going, oh, Poor Wayfaring Stranger, and then you listen to the recording and go, oh my gosh, I want to sing that. Another thing about the books is that the purchase of the book gives you an online code, which when you redeem it, gives you access to accompaniment tracks that are a live pianist playing, not some MIDI thing, and also the IPA source transcription for foreign language songs. So yeah, I saw a lot of heads go, whoop! It's really, really, really worth it for a number of reasons to have your students buy the appropriate book, okay? There's a sample. This is level 5. So there's the folk songs in pre-1900 on list A, 20th and 21st century repertoire on list B, and popular repertoire. Every level includes popular repertoire, so that if your student is interested in that, there's repertoire there that's graded. So if you are like me and your primary experience has been classical music, but you teach people who also love musical theater. I love musical theater, I just don't sing it that much. So it's not like I'm anti, it's just never been my deal, right? I find myself not knowing off the top of my head where different songs lie in terms of difficulty. This does that work for me, right? Say, hey, if you're ready to sing Ferrill by Schumann, you're also ready to sing Stairway to Paradise by Gershwin. And I don't have to have exhaustive knowledge of the entirety of musical history to make these sort of delineations, right? This is cool too. The only challenge to entry is how do I know what level my students are at? So I realize this is dense, but they say it better than I ever could. Students can enter the music development program, which is again the old name for the certificate program, at any level. They can move from level to level at their own pace. Students and teachers should consult the syllabus guide to determine the appropriate level. Many students and teachers start with the repertoire selection. So if you don't know, if you've got a student, a guinea pig student, and you're like, I want to try this out, but I don't know what level 4 is, right? Take a decent look at the syllabus and the repertoire at that level, and you'll start to go, oh, okay, I know that piece, and that's approximately this difficult, right? Many students and teachers start with the repertoire selections. The wide range of selections in the music development program repertoire lists make it easy to match each student to a level. Review the scale, chord, and arpeggio patterns required at that level, noticing keys, tempos, and formats. You may find that your student is ahead in some areas, but requires further development in others. Consider those elements that are already firmly in your student's grasp and decide which ones need additional review. Finally, look at musicianship requirements. What if my student's repertoire level, this is going to be common, they can sing repertoire that's a couple notches above the exercises that they can manage, the technical and musicianship skills. If your student's abilities in the areas of technique, oral skills, or reading skills are behind his or her current repertoire level, we generally advise you to opt for a lower level. And I would second that. I haven't been using this exclusively for a long time, but I would already second that. Right? I've got some students who I set at level 7, who probably could have done 8. But you know what we're doing in the meantime? They can learn their level 7 songs easily, and they're going to have a bunch of repertoire. Right? And they're going to be like, dang, I learned 8 songs this semester. Right? Plus, at any given time, I can be like, all right, my bad. Level 8. Right? At each level, there's a range of challenge in the repertoire list. This is true too. Once you get to know it really, really well, you'll see that some level 8 songs are on the north end and some level 8 songs are on the south end of that level, right? Your student has the option of substituting a piece from the next higher level for one assessment selection. Good to know. Planning your students' progress in this way allows them to focus on the higher levels of music making, finesse of their performance, and the pleasure of accomplishment. Imagine a world in which you can sing your repertoire without it taking every single ounce of your ability, right? Where something is at that 90-95% level where you can just nail it and feel really good. Finally, your students will enjoy a high level of performance success while also securing necessary musicianship skills that will provide them with a stronger foundation. Yeah?
On the last slide,
Yeah.
the list of the repertoire, there's more than that.
Yes.
That's just
This is yeah, I should have said that, thank you.
Okay.
This is the contents of the book,
Okay.
okay? There is far more than that at each level.
Okay.
There are, I don't know exactly, but there are 100+ songs at every level.
Oh, cool.
And you'll see stuff that's off the beaten path that will challenge you, but you'll see familiar Schubert songs, Handel, Purcell, 24 Italian songs, etc., right? Finally, if this is something that's at all of interest to you, this is my idea, guys. Unless you have a darn good reason not to use this system, I would strongly recommend you use this system. If you find certain parts of it onerous, leave them out. It's a la carte, right? If you don't want to add them or you don't have time in lessons to add them, leave them out. But if you have some sort of structure, it's better than no structure. I feel the same way about a calendar. The only system that doesn't work is no system, right? I don't care if you use a paper calendar or write it on your hand or use Google Calendar like I do. I don't care. But not having a system is not a system, right? If you're really interested in this, join me. I created a private Facebook group expecting 6 people to talk about RCM. It is now up to like 250 people. It is absolutely blown up, and it's really exciting. I am among the earliest, the most recent adopters, which is kind of funny that I created the group. I created the group thinking that I would connect with other people who were like, oh yeah, I've heard of that, I'd like to learn more about that. That would be even more novice than I am. What's happened in addition to that is that a bunch of people who've been teaching the RCM system for years are in on it. So if any of us, self-included, have questions about RCM, you put a thing on there and 50 comments later you'll have all the information you could ever need, right? RCM is super standard in Canada. I've asked some of my Canadian friends, 6, 7 out of 10 or more students who take private lessons in high school in Canada will take with somebody who uses the RCM. 6 or 7 out of 1,000 American students will take with somebody who uses the RCM. And I hope to change that, quite frankly. You know? By the way, I'm not a paid spokesperson. I just really, really, really believe in what they do and how many problems it solves for young teachers and how many headaches it would have saved me, especially in my early days of teaching, but even to this day.